Yeah.
With fighters, they're still quite gullible to all these fancy trends. It's like the newest thing. Like
This guy's promo video on his website was like him running through the forest, throwing spears and shooting bows and stuff like that.
because the culture isn't established, there's still no set this works. There is, but it's still very green, so to say, because it's a new sport. If you look at the evolution of MMA as a sport, since when has it grown really? The last 10 years? If you look at a sport like rugby, NFL, the traditions of strength training are very well established at this point.
Oh, Ron? Oh, look at that timing. That was ridiculous. Sorry, bro. Welcome back.
We're actually in the studio today with Meer from Ethos Performance, and we actually got connected. I don't know if he's listening to this, so shout out to Luke Kane. Kano, way back in the day, connected us. Yeah, so
Kano.
So you were his client, right? Correct?
Correct.
Yes. Okay, so for these people who don't know, way back in the day we competed in CrossFit, and Kano was kind of like the guy that I sort of wanted to be. Like, he was just better than me, but he was like the tall, skinny guy that was like really elite at fitness. And so I was like, oh, one day I'll replace him and beat him, but I actually never outpaced him. Surprisingly, he's the most unsuspecting elite athlete you've ever seen. It's like Nate Diaz. You're like, this guy doesn't work out. And he walks in the cage and he smokes people. So Kano was like the Nate Diaz of CrossFit.
He will love that comparison.
Yeah, if he's listening to this right now, undoubtedly he's having a laugh. But no, I think what's cool is, Mir, you've had like a very similar journey to us, similar age, similar pathway, like learning from the greats in your industry in strength and conditioning. But you went down the elite athlete path, and I think we sort of went down like sort of business CEO sort of pathway in terms of clientele focus. But how did it start for you? Like, give us an idea, because obviously combat sports, when you started this, how long ago? 10 years? How long have you had Ethos now?
Ethos is a brand 5 years.
Okay.
4 to 5 years, me focusing on working with combat athletes.
Yeah.
And creating like a designated space for about 7 years almost.
Okay, so pre-Conor McGregor.
Yeah, definitely pre-Conor McGregor.
Yeah, which is for the UFC actually existed before Conor McGregor, in case casual fans don't know.
In fact, it did.
Yeah. So where was the initial interest in combat sports, and then how'd you build to Ethos?
Okay. At 15, I started Muay Thai and getting involved in combat sports myself. So the initial love for combat sports stemmed from myself participating in combat sports. Then I went obviously down the route of continual education. So I studied sports science, and then progressively realized that the athlete population that I was interested in, I couldn't really get more hands-on experience with here in Sydney. As you know, the oceanic scene in combat sports here is just only starting to really grow and get recognition now. I mean, we were talking about it earlier. So I essentially set a goal, 7 years ago now, that I wanted to create a place that could house combat athletes here in Sydney. Almost like a place that I wish I had when I was a young combat athlete. And the goal has been to create a place where if a combat athlete walks in, we can effectively provide them with all the resources necessary to help them exceed in the sport, whether it be through nutrition, psychology, other resources, social support, and then obviously through strength and conditioning training also. So in a nutshell, once I had graduated from my degree, I went overseas and took part in some mentorships just to get some further education and some skin in the game in that area. I came back and leveraged existing relationships that I had by way of being a combat athlete myself at the time, and started coaching fighters for free, just to practice methods, get some social proof that, what I'm doing is actually working.
Yeah.
And slowly, like, word starts spreading that there's like, I'm developing small groups. It was cost effective at the time, and it just started growing, man. It was really organic at the start, and then it came to a critical point where I was like, shit, I'm looking after quite a few combat athletes now. Like, this can be something that I do full time.
Yeah.
And so then that's when I kind of really went full steam with it. I left, or I kind of stopped taking on more Gen Pop clients at the time, and I started really opening up more hours for more combat athlete groups. So then, the whole like 6 degrees of separation, one person knows another person, invites another person. There were definitely some catalyst athletes that helped with accelerating that whole process. Guys like Tyson, Pedro, George Kambosus, people seeing their success started making them want to see what everything like was about.
Yeah.
And then I guess with the popularity of Instagram continuously growing in the last 6 years, that made things organic also. And here we are now.
Yeah, that's cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
So just one facility you hadn't. So where did you start training the athletes out of?
Man, I was working at a commercial gym in Rhodes.
Okay.
Like any other PT, I was a glorified personal trainer by way of a sports science degree.
Yeah.
I was doing some volunteer work at the New South Wales Institute of Sport at the time also at NSWIS. And I guess that was the defining moment where I realized the populations that were existing at that place, it wasn't really what I was passionate about. I didn't want to go down working with track and field. Like, it wasn't my area of interest. So that's why I really deviated towards combat sports and went, look, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it with people that I'm super thrilled to work with.
Right.
So I was working with small groups at that commercial gym while I was working with my normal Gen Pop PT clients.
Right.
So my income was coming from my PT clients and no income was coming from working with fighters. Then I left that gym because I needed more space once the group started like getting bigger. I was running out of space. The logistics of that facility couldn't really meet what I was trying to do. And so I moved to a CrossFit gym also in Rhodes. I was subleasing some space at the front of that gym. That was for about 1.5 years, possibly 2 years.
This was mixed gym, right?
Mixed gym prior to Mick selling it.
Okay.
But yeah, mixed gym.
Yeah.
Once that hit a critical point, it was up until COVID. Lockdown happened initially in 2020. The owner of the gym at that time didn't welcome me back into that gym. Said that when lockdowns were going to finish, my place wasn't there anymore. So what may have seemed like a dick move on his part was honestly one of the biggest blessings, because at that time I had too many athletes and a somewhat business model to go to a fitness first and say, can we make this work?
Right.
It was never going to work.
Right.
I had to open my own place.
Right.
So I had 4 months to secure a lease, get fit outs done.
4 months.
4 months.
Jesus.
Yeah.
You mean the lockdown? You had the lockdown period.
I had lockdown to sort of lease out and open the place up, man. Yeah. It was
You must have been the only person trying to open a gym during lockdown.
It was nuts. Like that made loans, bank loans, made all those things so difficult, because why would you provide a loan to a such a risky business at the time? And so I was forced to open a gym, but it was great. It was awesome. The March was March 25th, 2020. About early April, I realized that I had no gym to go back to. So then it was a matter of, sourcing the lease, opening the facility, and it was awesome, man. It was such a fun period.
Yeah.
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 So one facility to answer your question, and it'll be 2 years since we've been there this August.
Well, yeah, I mean, we went through the same thing. Probably only difference is we had the lease signed already, so we had to make it work. But yeah, I feel your pain. Getting everything sorted, trying to get loans in a period where they're like, gyms? You mean the industry that everyone's shut and they've officially banned and said you can't actually train people? Yeah, that was not fun.
It was, I guess the blessing during that time was having worked with a more athletic population. The intrinsic motivation exists regardless of lockdowns and stuff. So when we opened up Ethos August 5th, 2021, we had an existing client base that were eager to get back into the gym.
Right.
So when we opened, it was full steam, let's get going. And then there was also a lot of interest in the combat sports community from new people to come and work with us.
Right.
Now that we had a facility, I could do what I wanted, keep the place looking the way I wanted and drive the growth of the place the way I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
There was no overarching person that could tell me, no, you can't do it this way.
Right. So what was, obviously I think the next step, one of the steps we always say is big in becoming a business owner is hiring your first staff member. So did you already have someone that was helping you out, or did you hire your first full-time person?
So I had 2 coaches that were working with us prior to opening that facility. So when we opened, we effectively had 2 coaches working with us, which is great. Since then, we have almost between internal and external staff, 7 more people involved in the business to some capacity now. So we've got 2 different people involved in media, our marketing growth coordinator. We've have 4 new coaches since we've opened, and organically, they've all come through our internship program. Effectively, all the coaches that have worked with us at some stage have always come through our internship program.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that American model where, for me, I like it. It's a 3 to 4 month period where I get to see what that person's about beyond their education. kind of like how they are when they show up in the mornings, what they do when it's quiet, what sort of questions they ask, how they conduct themselves, all the things that you can't really teach a person.
No.
That period lets me see that firsthand.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the what's the criteria for an internship at a gym like yours? Because I'm thinking, you know, what's unique about your situation is people want you, right? They want to know your insights, what's in your head. Obviously, you can push back and be like, it's my system, it's my training models, my programs. You'll get it regardless of whatever the coach is. But, you know, people still want Tyson or George's, you know, head strength and conditioning. So how do you mitigate that with your coaches?
So the internship program is, honestly, it improves every time we have a new intake. So now it's all e-learning online. So we have a module and a curriculum online. There's objectives every week. There's like a forum, question submissions. That only happened as of our last intake. We've extended it to a 4-month program now. It was previously 3 months. There's like a 2-stage interview process. Everybody has to have like a minimum bachelor's degree in a relevant education area.
Yeah.
So I take, and some of the other coaches take, but mainly myself, we take a weekly theory component. So at least once a week, the interns get a good hour and a half with myself over that particular topic. And when we're on the floor, there's a minimum hourly requirement every week for the interns. And so during that time, they get to ask questions. And I'm a pretty like open person.
Right.
Yeah. There's none of that ego of coach these people.
No secrets.
Yeah, no, there's no secrets, man. Like I think, what you see on social media can sometimes like butcher what strength and conditioning really is.
Right.
You know, for us, we understand like the metaphor of, you know, meat and potatoes. It's usually very simple stuff, just staged correctly at the right time.
Yeah.
I think what we do really well is we understand a lot of the other things about combat athletes. And by way of practice, like we work with a lot of fighters every week. So, you know, repetition allows you to hone a skill with that particular population.
Right.
Like if I'm working with over 100 fighters every week, over time I get to see trends and go, okay, well, doesn't really work so well. This kind of tends to work pretty well.
Yeah.
So it's skin in the game.
Yeah.
And you guys have had Jordan Sullivan on, and we spoke about this last time also. And there's a difference between understanding the theory and then understanding how to apply it to that population group.
Yeah.
And that just comes with practice.
So all your clients would have like, they have fights on the calendar. They're like actively pursuing some sort of martial arts career.
I don't take on a lot of new athletes myself now. We have like fantastic coaches
but in
at
the gym,
facility.
I mean.
In the gym?
Yeah.
Yeah, more often than not, man, I'd say 80% of our members compete to some capacity.
Wow.
Right.
Whether it's team sports or combat sports. And a
Okay.
majority of our athlete population are still definitely combat sport athletes.
Wow.
It's interesting because like strength and conditioning in combat sports for like, I don't know the exact time period, but definitely for a long time, it was this very strange, like very non-scientific practice. Like the first person that really comes to mind that was like kind of pioneering like the strength and conditioning coach of athletes was who's the movement guy? What's Ido Portal? Dude, Ido Portal. I mean, I'm not discrediting what he does. I still think that stuff works, but it's just. It was kind of like that. It was like, all right, we're going to take our shoes off. We're going to get in the grass.
We're going to go on the beach.
Yeah, we're going to do crawls and that sort of stuff. I'm not saying that training doesn't work, but there wasn't a lot of like structure and numbers and progression to it. I see the stuff you do. Obviously, it's, you know, obviously a lot more science-based, evidence-based training. Andy Galpin obviously pioneered a lot more strength conditioning, evidence-based stuff. So we have them to thank. But it was very weird for a while. Like some of the guys that were going on Joe Rogan talking about strength and conditioning, like there was this one guy, I can't remember what it was called. I think it was Carlos, what was that? The old school Carlos guy, I can't remember his name. The guy that used to fight GSP, the kickboxer.
Condit.
Yeah, Carlos Condit.
Yeah.
He had this movement strength and conditioning coach, and it was like, it's called like the natural method or something. And there was like a video, this guy's promo video on his website was like him running through the forest.
Yeah.
Yeah, like throwing spears and shooting bows and stuff like that. I was like, this is
cool.
Hard to build a business model.
Yeah, I was like, this is a very interesting take on strength and conditioning for combat athletes. Like, all right, guys, meet you at the park. We'll run through the forest.
Because the culture isn't established and there's still no set this works. I mean, there is, but it's still very green, so to say, because it's a new sport. If you look at the evolution of MMA as a sport, since when has it grown really? The last 10 years in terms of popularity?
Yeah.
If you look at a sport like rugby, NFL, the traditions of strength training are very well established at this point. So everybody at the minimum capacity does a bench press, a squat, and deadlift. It's not uncommon.
Yeah.
With fighters, they're still quite gullible to all these fancy trends, and it's like the newest thing. Like Ida Portal, his stuff's great. Like it looks awesome. I'm sure there's a system to it, and he squats, he lunges, he presses, he does pull-ups, he does all those basic things. Fighters, from what I can see, and through like obviously Joe Rogan podcast, it's always like looking for that thing that nobody else is doing this. This is what's going to separate me. Yeah. When in reality, it's not. No, it's not. And look, the what we do as strength and conditioning coaches, if I isolate it to gym work, because in my opinion, that's not only what the role of the S&C coach is. If I isolated the gym work, then you could argue that what we do in the gym doesn't necessarily have a direct transfer over to what they do in the sporting arena.
Right.
We've seen fighters in history and even currently do very like poor, by our definition, strength and conditioning type training, but they're still very successful in their sport.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like skill acquisition is the most important thing. So I think over time, we're going to see an improvement in the standards for strength and conditioning for combat athletes.
Right.
And look, that's what we're also trying to have a positive influence on.
Right. So you said they're not just the gym worker, strength and conditioning coach. So what else would you include in that bucket?
I mentioned it earlier. I think a good coach, I'll just call it a coach, provides an avenue for social support, a possibility to connect the fighter with other areas they might need to work on, whether it be things like a psychologist, a dietitian, looking at the overall schedule, and ultimately there's an element of like relationship/social support involved in being a coach. So I think if you can't execute on those other areas, then having success in getting buy-in from them doing your program isn't going to happen, because they won't trust you. So if they don't trust you, they won't do your program. And ultimately, if they're not doing your program consistently, they're not going to get results.
Yeah. That's the biggest thing with the coach, right? It's why I think people flock to a big name coach, is you just like, if it worked for him, hopefully it'll work for me. Because you get so few shots as an athlete, right? It's like you pretty much like this season, it needs to work. So you don't want to like roll the dice with a coach who's like, you just don't know if it's going to work.
Definitely. And I think having success in that area helps in terms of showing that athlete, look, we've done this before with athletes just like yourself, and there's a proven system that works. So there's no reason why it won't work for you.
Yeah. So, so let me ask you then, with that being said, how did you buy in and get the trust of a guy like George Kambosus, obviously your most high-profile athlete of recent?
Yeah.
You shared a little bit with me on the phone how you guys met.
Yep.
But how do you prove to someone like that? I mean, obviously at the time as well, like he's still up and coming also, right?
How long ago did you start working together?
5 years.
Yeah.
Right. So when no one had heard of him?
When I started working with George, he was well-known domestically.
Yeah.
He was number 1 ranked in the country, but globally, nobody knew who he was. And even in Australia, like you guys there's absolutely no chance either of you would have known who he was 5 years ago.
No, I only knew who he was leading up to the Lopez fight.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. But by that point, that's quite a big event. You're fighting for undisputed status, right?
Yeah.
So I just reached out to George 5 years ago. I was 24 at the time. He was an athlete that was at that stage where I thought, look, I can work with this person. His profile isn't so, like, he's not so established where he'll just look at me and go, look, I already have everything taken care of. Yeah. So I took a chance. I reached out to him several times. It wasn't just once. And
you heard nothing on the first ones?
First few times, nothing.
Yeah. Emails, DMs?
Just Instagram DMs, man. Yeah. And over time, I think it took a 6-month period where I then met up with him. And I just said, look, let me prepare you for your next fight. And if you enjoy the process, we can reassess things. If not, we'll just part ways. And that was that.
And you did it for free?
For free.
What made you choose? Was he doing strength and conditioning at the time?
I noticed he was doing some training. I knew it wasn't as structured, and I knew I could do better.
Okay. Is that why you chose him? Because you're like, good timing, up and coming, making some big errors here, could provide a lot of value.
Yeah, look, at the time, let's say George was an American-based athlete and he was working with a guy like Lauren Landau, who's one of my mentors. Yeah. I wouldn't have approached him because you're
being taken care of.
You're being taken care of. You're working with a great coach. I know the systems that are in place are going to look after you. In his case, I knew that I could help him. I was confident I could help him.
Right.
And over time, you train someone 3 times a week, you just start talking, you develop a relationship. And I'd like to think that I can communicate quite well with most people. And so we developed a relationship that's been long-standing since. Yeah. So George is a good friend of mine now, and we've obviously had a lot of success since working together. And
Yeah, I do want to talk about the lead up to his recent fight, but just in that 5-year time frame, what are the holes you're looking for in an athlete like him? So obviously, one thing unique about combat sports, obviously they generally have to stay in a weight class. I don't know if I assumed he was lightweight the whole time.
Yeah,
when
he's
you
always
work
been
with
a
him.
lightweight. Yeah.
So obviously you've got to tune things up, but you can't add muscle to the frame, right? Or you can a little bit, but you've got to be careful with weight cuts and all that sort of stuff. So how do you loop that in? Like, how do you obviously don't want to give away all his weaknesses or secrets and stuff, but how are you kind of picking holes and assessing something like that?
Okay, so I like thinking about it as like a planning backwards.
Okay.
So if you gave someone a maze and showed them the end of the maze, as opposed to starting at the front of the maze, you'd have more success working backwards if you were trying to solve a maze. I like to see it approaching performance in the same sort of way. So if I look at an athlete like George, you'd look at a fight date and then qualities that he needs to work on based on assessments, his training age and his context. And then you work backwards. You have key things you test for, key things you're looking for, like you would with any other athlete, and then you plan accordingly for those things. I guess as the years go on, the programming gets a little bit more tricky. It becomes harder to squeeze the athlete because they become well trained.
Yeah.
The whole like the window of noob gains diminishes as training age continues.
Yeah.
So it gets a little harder to, you can't just 3x8 trap bar and expect the same results year after year. So now we have a much more in-depth testing process than 5 years ago when I had no other coaches, no resources, broke PT, So that's in a nutshell how we work backwards. So for George, it's actually a lot clearer now, I guess in the last 3-4 years programming for him and working with him, because he's always had more or less a good notice of his fight, which allows us, okay, we have this much time to work on these sorts of things. Whereas with a lot of amateur athletes and semi-pro athletes, you don't get that clarity. You don't get that window of opportunity to go, okay, we have 8 weeks before the next fight, or we have 6 months. So that's the process in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Is there a particular question you have regarding George?
Well, sometimes, I mean, I don't know boxing as well as MMA, obviously, because you train my brother and we can get into that later, but
Cam.
Yeah, Cam Rowson.
Shout out.
Yeah,
Cam.
Battle Giraffe.
Cam's a great guy.
Yeah.
But they all know him. He's a frequent guest.
Yeah.
He's a two-time guest.
He sat in on the Jordan podcast. Yeah.
Has he?
Yeah, he sat right there.
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
Yeah. He didn't have a mic, but he made it work. But yeah, it's just the obviously there's kind of this, it's more established, right? Boxing, it's been around for a long time, but obviously for a very long time they've done it without strength and conditioning. And then as of recently, probably some of the worst strength and conditioning I've seen is who was the guy that just fought Fury? Wilder. Wilder's like, don't worry, this camp I got up to like a 500-pound bench press. I'm like, dude, you need to work on your legs. Like, that's where the power comes from. So obviously there's still coming some pretty bad strength and conditioning, right? So
definitely.
It's also something that most people, even if you don't box, would like to know. You're like, oh, what lift would get me a big punch?
Yeah.
Like, cause I used to read like, oh, it's all lats. I'm like, oh, dude, it's all lats.
Yeah. So for, I guess my question for a guy like George in boxing at that sort of weight class, like, what are the areas that generally people are like making mistakes with, focusing on? And then like, what are the areas that people need to focus more on?
Okay.
Because I'm thinking like, med ball, core work, fucking banded fucking punches and stuff.
Yeah, I think, okay, in no particular order, I'll jot down a few mistakes I see. I still see a lot of combat athletes training too much.
Yeah.
Training frequency, volume is very high, and a lot of it's non-specific, in that there's that notion of the more I do, the more prepared I'll be. So higher work correlates to higher readiness, which isn't the case. A lot of athletes don't ever really step back and observe their training schedule and look at the fluctuations of like high, medium, low days throughout their week, which is a big reason why a lot of fighters more often than not feel tired throughout the week and like they're not recovered enough. But then they'll, watch Joe Rogan podcasts and pay for saunas, pay for, brain armor, alpha brain, mushroom tech, all this stuff, sleeping 3 hours a night.
Yeah.
And like they're just so distorted with the basics.
Yeah.
Basic nutritional understanding is also one, which I mentioned in the previous podcast that I was on, that people don't have an idea of, which is why it's great having Geordie as a resource. And I've been working with Geordie for about 5 years now too.
Yeah, awesome.
Other mistakes is just non-specific, a lot of circuits, like you said, a lot of band punches, and I still see it. I'm not going to name names, but I still see even like, just Sydney-based practitioners adding bands and balls to sport-specific movements. Like, I'm going to get a band and perform punches and kicks because that will then equate to faster punches and kicks. Whereas
As in, like, resisting the punch.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if you look at, the nature of how force is produced, transferred, and released effectively, from the limb, it's not going to improve by adding a band around your hands.
Right.
The Soviets and the old Soviet boxing S&C programs were actually quite well thought out.
Okay.
If you look at some of their programs, they did good sound strength training. They had like good plyometric progressions naturally in their programs. They used to do cold plunges, all those sorts of things. And this is from like the early 70s.
Right.
So some systems had been well thought out. I definitely think the boxing culture of strength and conditioning is a lot worse than MMA now.
Yeah.
Obviously, having the UFC PI as a catalyst for that change is a big thing.
Yeah.
But man, I see so many boxers at high levels, they can't even, they don't know how to move. They don't know how to do a basic like lunge. Like they don't even know how to hinge. They're still very good at their sport.
Yeah.
So then I think, imagine you started doing this consistently and got great at these areas too. It would improve you as an athlete, definitely.
Sure. Yeah.
That's another common mistake. So a lot of non-specific circuit type training.
Right.
Things that combat athletes could do better would be aligning with an S&C team or coach that has skin in the game and success working with that population group. Someone who understands the general structure of strength training and won't just add more onto a schedule, because especially mixed martial artists, their schedules are so busy, especially in camp, man. Like they're juggling boxing, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, war work, sparring.
Yeah.
So it's so hard to add on more to that. If you look at a camp like your brother's camp, CKB, and just looking at his schedule, you got to be very careful with how much volume you add onto that schedule, especially in camp.
Yeah.
Because that person's just going to burn out. They're going to get injured.
Yeah.
So I guess a basic example of good communication would be your brother was supposed to fight in August on the 20th.
Yeah.
And his fight got postponed to September. And he emailed me and said, my fight's been postponed. What do you think? I said, look, chances are, because you were fighting in August, that things were increasing in intensity leading up to the 20th of August. And so I said, now that it's in September, we probably should back off a little bit and allow some compensation, like allow your body to recover a little before we ramp things up. Because from my experience, if he keeps training at that intensity for another month, more likely that he'll run into an injury or something.
Yeah.
So he said, you know what, that's a great idea, because I'm noticing that I'm starting to feel the effects of the camp. So he's like, a back off would be great.
Yeah.
So like I said, just effective communication.
Yeah.
And me having dealt with that in the past allowed me to apply that to his situation.
Yeah. So like staying on my brother for a sec.
Yeah.
One thing that I've always spoke to him about that I think is unique about him, especially with a lot of the people he fights with, I think it will be less unique in future generations, but because he got into it, somewhat late, 15, 16 compared to, the age people are getting into it nowadays. He spent a lot of time doing strength and conditioning, but bodybuilding, right? Fucking 10x10 German volume training and Poliquin stuff, right? But he had a lot more reps of squats and leg extensions and curls and bench. Like me and him were just smashing the gym all the time, eating heaps of protein. He put on a lot of muscle, very early on before he started combat sports. How helpful do you think that was for now with like injury prevention? And do you think he has to do a lot less because he didn't master, but he got very competent at squatting and deadlifting and benching to the point where you think, there's probably not much benefit to like going way heavier on this,
I think it definitely helps, and it definitely would have helped if we collectively understand that building strength, having, adaptations to hypertrophy, those things take time. It's common for fighters to think that they should start strength and conditioning training when they're in camp or when a fight has been announced or a competition has been announced. If you look at other sports like rugby league, there's designated off-seasons, pre-seasons, where during those times, your gym work increases, because once you're in season, the contributions have to decrease because you're performing every weekend. You're playing at a high intensity every weekend. So for your brother, having spent some time building some muscle, building a general foundation of strength, even if the methods weren't as good as they could be, definitely helpful.
Yeah.
Definitely.
If you had a youth person, how early would you start them weights training?
7? Yeah, like.
And why would you wait so late?
Why would I wait so late?
Yeah, I'm joking, but is that
I'd
just
fought
because you
four.
just because obviously I lifted young as well? You don't get into any of the dangers and stuff that people generally talk about with people lifting at 7?
If it depends on how they're lifting, right? I mean, I had a chat with a parent the other week about this. She said, "What if isn't it going to stunt my kid's growth?" I said, all the research points towards that not being the case, especially if they're lifting properly and they have good progressions. So if you take a 7-year-old on, you're not loading them up with max weight on the trap bar or anything like that. You're teaching them basic body weight movements, keeping it fun for them, of course, through play, all those sorts of things. And as they get older, you start, you can specify a little bit more and increase loads and those sorts of things. So I don't really think there's any age where you should start resistance training.
Yeah, it's definitely something we miss out on here because you just look at the States.
Correct.
And they're already so strong when they're like 16
strong.
or 17.
Definitely.
So they obviously didn't start when they were 15.
The high school, collegiate program there is a lot more advanced than ours. If you look at the gyms in most of the schools in the States, it's unbelievable. $1 million facilities.
Crazy.
It's good to see that it's improving in Australia as well. Like if
It
you look
is,
at some of the
here that
private
look like
schools
that.
here, they're awesome. So it's on the rise, but again, we're also a younger country, so we're still a bit behind on those things.
So would you say like some of these I guess some of these new crops of athletes that are coming up when they're doing strength and conditioning, does it go from more general to more specific the more advanced they get? Because a guy like George, right, you're talking about there's like only so much you can squeeze. I imagine you would be getting more specific with him, or not necessarily. You're just kind of like refining the same movement patterns because if it's, a kid starts starts combat sports at 7, probably just want him to learn how to hinge, learn how to squat, learn how to press. He doesn't need to like learn all these crazy fancy movements in the beginning, right? Correct.
Let me ask you a question. When you say specific, what do you mean? What are specific?
Movements that look like the sport that they're doing.
Yeah, we barely do any of that shit at our gym.
Right.
For anyone.
A specific,
Well, there you go.
the most specific you would get for us is George doing like a rotational type exercise with a stimulus that's relevant to his sport. And that'd probably be like a 1% inclusion in camp. So it'd be him, throwing a sandbag at a wall, but he has to react to a partner. Right. And the partner's reaction isn't clicking a finger, it's him throwing a punch or feinting. So that would be the element of specificity. But in that same block, George is still doing a variation of a squat movement. He's still doing a variation of a unilateral squat type movement. He's still pressing, he's still pushing, he's still pulling. We just modify the speeds of the movement, the angles of the movement, the layout and the structure of the program to make those things more specific to the nature of the sport. Right. Like the whole dynamic correspondence theory of training, where you don't need to mimic sporting movements to make things specific. You look at the way forces are applied in a particular sport, the moment that the forces are applied, the speeds at which forces are applied, and you can get more specific in those areas in the weight room.
Right.
This is why, for example, fighters just doing powerlifting type training isn't viable all year round. Not saying you don't get them strong, but if they're only moving weight slowly, then you're missing out on a whole nother aspect of them being able to do other things like, strength speed type work, the whole like force velocity curve relationship. Yep. You can't just sit on one end of the curve the whole year round because it's not where the sporting movements happen. It's probably why a lot of fighters who just do powerlifting, tend to get injuries and muscle tears, etc. Because combat sports is very rotational in nature. It's not just a up and down sagittal squat, bench, deadlift sort of sport. So you can't just do that year round and neglect everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like a pattern that I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this, but people that get really strong at squat, bench, dead, like powerlifters, and then go to do like anything that's like slightly athletic, they always get injured.
Yeah.
Because they've become so powerful in such a very specific plane that the second they move into another plane and they apply that force, which is like heaps of force, it's so disproportionate, the different planes, they tear an ACL, they pop an Achilles, like they tear a calf or something like that. I don't know. Have you seen that? I've seen that pattern a lot.
Yeah, I've seen it in a lot of athletes. I won't name names. And I think, like you said, the thing is you become so specific in that particular movement plane at those speeds and in those movements, and then you go and throw a kick that's at however many meters per second faster than a squat is, and then that person goes, my groin is sore now, or I just hurt my pelvis, etc. So it's why you need to expose your athletes to different planes, different speeds, different exercises in the weight room that will best equip them to deal with the context of the sport environment.
Yeah.
It's not taking the sport environment into the weight room and replicating it,
Right.
and hoping that replicating it will help transfer back to the sport,
Yeah.
because you're just wasting time.
Yeah.
If you want them to get better at their sport, they should just do their sport.
Yeah.
If you want to improve their athletic qualities to best enable them in their sport, that's what your fucking job is in the weight room.
Right. We talked a lot about obviously power and strength and stuff. Now, let's use it, George, for the example. Cardio is obviously a huge part of your job as well.
Correct.
So balancing strength and the conditioning side of things in the lead up to a fight like that. I mean, he's getting so much cardio in with his boxing training, right?
Good
So
point.
it's like, where do you come in with the cardio side of things? Because it's like strength work. He's not really doing strength work in his boxing sessions. I mean, kind of if he's doing like heavy shots or whatever, but he's always doing cardio. So how do you kind of balance that out in the lead up to a recent fight?
For someone like George, that's why my priority with me is let's always get in our lift type sessions in. I'll call them lift sessions, but there'd be a combination of several things depending on in camp, out of camp stages.
Yeah. And
with him, George is one of those athletes that knows himself very well, and over the years he's very in tune with his own body. And I'm not sure if Geordie has mentioned this stuff to you either, but when it comes to things like nutrition and fight week strategies, a lot of the times they're quite good with themselves. They know what works for them, especially at that elite level. He didn't get to becoming an undisputed champion because he winged it. Right? You refine that process every time you have another fight. So for George, we have a lot of communication around what to do outside of our sessions in terms of like running volume, high-low days, those sorts of things, because he still likes running. So when I first met him, he did a lot more of it than he does now, and he's a lot smarter with his training now after our conversations.
You're talking about running, or are you talking about
running?
Yeah, running.
Yeah. A lot of the like circuits that he was doing a lot more of it when he was younger. Again, now he's slightly older as an athlete, so he understands what's more important.
Yeah.
That'd be in George's case. With a lot of the MMA athletes, they don't do as much conditioning type work relative to boxers in terms of like the running and the endurance based work. So if it's viable, I like to do conditioning work with my combat athletes, definitely. And depending on whether they're in camp or out of camp, sometimes it's specific work, meaning drills at certain intensities, bag work, partner-based work, and sometimes it's also non-specific. By non-specific, I mean things like using rowers, ski ergs, farmers carry, sled pushers, push-ups, etc.
Yeah.
So we have different tests that we do at our facility to measure and test different energy systems by way of like aerobic, anaerobic energy systems. And with our sports science team now, we can like establish a profile of someone and identify what we feel like they need to work on. And so we address that just like we do with their strength training. There's a saying that says, I think fatigue makes a fool of a man.
Yeah.
I can't remember who said that.
Fatigue makes cowards of us all.
Lombardi, I think it was.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Vince Lombardi. I think so. So yeah, definitely. And it applies to combat sports a lot. So a lot of the time when I'm intaking and onboarding a combat athlete or a fighter or any other athlete, I ask them what they feel like they need to work on. We look at like some of their last few fights, and you get an idea of what that person needs to work on. So that alongside your quantitative assessment and your testing with that person, you get a good picture of, okay, let's work on these things.
Yeah.
So conditioning, definitely address it with all of your athletes. Like you said, like a lot of the time they get adequate conditioning from their training, and if they feel like they're not conditioned, like I had mentioned earlier, it's probably because they're doing a little bit too much in their training schedule. They're under-recovered, they're overworking. So sometimes when you just strip back some sessions and better structure things, they do tend to feel a lot better. I recently started working with another professional MMA athlete, and he was a perfect example of this. He said, I feel like I need to be doing more. I want to be doing more sprints. I want to do some hill sprints. And when he sent me his schedule, I was like, man, you really don't need to be doing more.
Yeah.
If anything, why don't we prioritize the sessions that you're doing? Because you don't need to be doing 5 sessions a day. He was doing 5 sessions on some days. And
5 sessions in a day.
5 sessions in a day.
Oh my God.
Now, like, I'm not exaggerating. By session, I mean, for example,
But how's he gonna have time to get to the hills?
he'd be doing like a run in the morning, and then he'd have a pad session in the morning, and then in the evening he'd have 3 classes. That's what I mean by 5 sessions, right?
Yeah.
So he was doing that for 3 days of the week, and I said, look, let's prioritize the sessions that you definitely need to make and strip some back. Just see how you feel after a week. And it's not me just saying this to support what I'm saying. That particular athlete in his case said he felt a lot better.
Yeah.
And so we just subbed some of those sessions for a conditioning type session that I thought he could benefit from, and we had good success. So it always varies on the athlete. It depends if they're working full-time. It depends if they're a part-time athlete. It depends if they're a full-time athlete. Because that then opens up more time, more availability, et cetera. Different stresses you need to account for. Are they a laborer? Are they a student? Are they a parent? All those things.
Do you have any, maybe you can name them if you want, but do you have any like just genetic freaks where they've come in and you just thought they're explosive, but they never get tired, but they just, they hit hard, but they don't run out of power? Like just one of those freaks, those all-rounders, like a Usman, like hits super hard, but just has incredible gas tank, like just genetic outliers. Because usually you exist on a spectrum, right?
Yeah,
to
definitely.
power to endurance, but then there's just freaks that come out of nowhere sometimes, and you think, God, you're just like special.
I've definitely seen some natural athletes come through the gym, and when we do their testing, we look at them and go, the coaches will be like, he has
got one.
Yeah, we got one. He has done he's barely done any sort of resistance training, and these are his numbers. It's awesome. So we've definitely had a few of these athletes. Look, Tyson's a natural athlete, definitely.
Yeah.
When you look at the way he picks things up, he's super like diligent with picking things up. He's definitely got some of the best numbers at our facility, even when we compare him to like some of the UFC PI athlete standards.
Yeah.
He like blasts most of them. So
Yeah, right.
Tyson's definitely a natural athlete, which is why it's cool seeing his progressions now, because if he can hone in on his skill acquisition and pair that with his natural athleticism, I think he's going to have a big run at the light heavyweight division.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, he had an injury, right? So he tore his ACL, I believe. Yeah, he's like in the fight.
He had three surgeries.
Yeah, fuck.
Yeah.
So
it's over and over again.
He had two ACL recons on the same side. His first one, this is all like public, so I'm happy to share it. His first one was
listen to a video of him talking about it.
Yeah. He's very public with it, because I think it's a good story for everyone.
Yeah.
In terms of the resilience and backing yourself and pushing through. And I think a lot of times when people get injured, there's that barrier of I can never be the same. And I think it's correct. You will never be the same, but you can be different.
Right.
And you can come back and be better. And I'm confident that that's what Tyson's doing right now. So Tyson had an ACL against his Shogun fight. They did the first surgery, wasn't successful. Did a second procedure, and then realized a third time that another surgery was necessary. So then they did a second ACL surgery, and effectively it put him out for almost 3 years, man, 3.5 years.
Yeah.
From Shogun fight to his last fight in April this year. So it was a long road for him. But man, what a diligent person. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say that he was completely on the whole time,
No,
but
of
when
course.
it mattered, he showed up and he put in the work. And
Yeah.
I don't think he ever said, "This is it. Like I'm giving up, or I'm not gonna be able to make it back."
He's still young, right?
Tyson's 30.
Yeah.
30.
Well, with the age of, you've seen this as well, right? With the age of elite athletes, especially in combat sports, getting older and older and older. Like these guys are still getting successful runs, like multiple runs in their late 30s into their 40s.
Look, Tyson's 30, right? If you look at Volkanovski, he's 33, and I'd say he's in his peak now in terms of performance.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I think Tyson's coming into his peak now. And with someone like him, it's about a careful play of managing loads and volumes both in and out of camp, because we can't ignore the fact that he's got such a significant injury history. But man, working with Tyson is an absolute pleasure. He's so good to work with.
Yeah.
We communicate so well together now. We were just speaking earlier today. He's very diligent in like updating me on things. So yeah, that'd be a very nice example of how that coach-athlete relationship should be.
Yeah.
He'll let me know, look, this is not happening, man. It's too hard, or not too hard as in it's too much this week. I'm sore. I have wrestling tomorrow night. Can we pull back a little bit on this? So there's no ego in our relationship there. I need to modify things. And now that he's training at CKB and he's fighting on the 20th of August, I'm aware of how intense his training week is at CKB. Yeah. It's why I went over there with him last year in June, and that's when I met your brother, Locke.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I just wanted to see what it was like there. You'll find that every gym has their own sort of structure and intensity about it. And in camp, anybody will tell you the CKB guys, they work hard, man.
Yeah.
So I can't tell Tyson you're doing, all these high volume, even high intensity type strength sessions 3 times a week alongside that training schedule. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So again, it's it's a fine play of what we can get away with, and then out of camp smashing him while we have the opportunity.
Yeah.
And just going back to the testing, because we've started doing this at the gym as well.
Yeah.
How much tech do you use in the actual testing of the athletes?
Yeah, so more recently in the last 12 months, we started bringing on more tech. So we use ForceTech's, the force plate system, and we use the force frame system. So that would be the two tech pieces that we use. We're about to bring on some timing gates for our field sport athletes to do some speed tests in the off-season period. Those would be our tech pieces. So we do jump tests, strength tests, shoulder tests, hip, groin, neck.
And how
tests.
useful do you find like measuring newtons of like individual limbs compared to just testing lifts in the gym?
The thing is, we still test lifts too, because the tech themselves have limitations. For example, a force plate, you use an IMTP as your max force measure, like your strength measure. But it's very limited in the fact that you're measuring force production in one joint angle. So it's at that mid-thigh position. So you're not really getting a good dynamic strength of that person in terms of their upper body, their lower bodies, particular lifts. So we combine our testing reports with the tech that we have alongside their gym-based lifts.
Yeah.
So all our athletes still do, 1 to 3 RM tests, endurance type tests like max push-ups, max chin-ups, etc. And we have body weight standards for those things. We do tests for their conditioning, like we do aerobic type tests. We do repeat alactic type tests. We do anaerobic type tests. Yeah, definitely. So our tech is useful, but it's not in isolation.
I got it. So what has it added that the lifts didn't have? Is it like, now I see the left to right in balance, I get injured I didn't used to get?
Yeah, definitely. So we couldn't test any jumps previously, aside from putting chalk on someone's finger and saying jump up and touch the wall, and then we'll measure the vertical, which is still a great way to do things remotely with someone, and if they don't have the resources. But now we can test, shoulder strength and force production in various positions, like internal rotation, external rotation. We can play around with those things. I'd say the testing reports that we have now can flag things a lot better than what we could in the past, right? So now if we test someone early on and we have certain percentages of difference and we have a profile of someone, it gives us a very nice picture of what we can work on with that person. In the past, it may have been more of a movement type based assessment, some push-ups, a single leg squat to a box, all things which we still do, but the limitations were in that we didn't really have good quantitative analysis of the person. Previously. If you look at injuries, for example, if someone's done an ACL or a meniscus and they're returning to sport, we can generate reports now that give us good limb symmetry index, differences between left and right hand side. We can share that information with the physios, and we can set parameters around their return to sport, this person needs to be within 5% if we're going to allow them to return to full training camp. I'm working with a couple of guys now who have done ACLs, and with their physios, that's what we do. Depending on the severity of the surgery and the nature of that athlete, we might set a target based on, they're ready for testing now. We take a report. This is the person. We're going to test again in 8 weeks. Ideally, they're within 10% before they're allowed to go back to, live wrestling, as an example. So the testing process enables us to make those decisions a little bit more effectively now.
And what do you think about those sports that they do in like American football and stuff now, where if they see certain markers on athletes, they just discard them? So like if people's feet collapse in on tests or their knees buckle in on a jump, just because the data shows they're more likely to get injured and they're going to pay the athlete, so they're trying to look after their investments, they just see the data, discard them.
I think that's negligent, because we've got some athletes who are performing at very, 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 very high levels who don't necessarily perform the best on tests. And then we've got some athletes who perform very well on tests, but they're very low at their sport at the moment. So again, it's just a tool, right? Like the testing, like I said, it just enables your decisions a little bit more. It gives you a little bit more information that you may not have had. Can you do your job without it? I hope you can. Does it enable your job a little bit more? Yeah, it's nice to have. Definitely.
Yeah, what's so interesting about I think one of the big mysteries of combat sports is power, right? Is it can you develop it? Are you born with it? Where does it come from? Is it driven through the feet? Is it all these different things? Because you look at so many different people and you can't ever really go, well, if you think Tyson's the ideal body type to hit super hard, well, you could look at Deontay Wilder, hits way harder, right? Or hits as hard at least, right? And it's they're totally different bodies, right? One's a stick with huge chest, and one's this short, compact tube. So it's this mystery. So is that like a thing that so many fighters come to and they're like, oh dude, I can't hit hard. Like I need more power. Like give me more power. Is that like
almost every single?
I need more knockouts, bro. It's like, well, you
almost every single form that I receive for
definitely
like
chest, bro.
for an
I need more knockout
chest.
power.
for an athlete who's like, one of our questions is, what are the things you feel like you need to work on, right?
Yeah.
Explosive power.
That
Yeah.
or trying to win those things are like those game shows where it's like hardest
Right.
punch wins.
Yeah.
So but there's so many, like once you know more about combat sports, obviously there's lots of things that go into
Yeah.
power, right?
You know what it's like, Locke? It's like someone asking a dietitian, what's the best thing I need to eat for the best fuel?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, what's the best superfood
Yeah.
for my fuel?
What's the best food for a six pack?
You're like,
Yeah.
look, it doesn't exist. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right? There's a culmination of things that you need to be doing right.
Yeah.
So, can you improve someone's power production? Definitely, you
Yes.
can. Is there a genetic component to it? Definitely, there is. Some people naturally just hit hard. Now, what is it that's making them hit hard? Is it their ability to, relax and contract? Is it their moment arm because they have long levers and their ability to generate force and then express it across a long moment? Is that what it is? Definitely, possibly. So, I think you can improve someone's power. If we can, again, generally speaking, improve someone's force production from the lower limb, increase their efficiency of their trunk/core to direct and transfer forces across the limb, and then improve their efficiency to express that force. So long as they're efficient in their skill, you'd hope that what we can do can make them more powerful. So I think you definitely can. Like this, I'm working with an MMA athlete who this morning said, we're about 2 programs in, and he said, man, I feel really good. I feel like I'm hitting harder. Now, could that just be anecdotal because he's doing some structured strength training? Yes. Do I genuinely think he's hitting harder? Probably, because he's getting stronger. And if you're getting stronger, you can produce more force. And if he's doing his skills training, he can apply that force quickly. So you can improve your power, and a lot of it is, what you're also born with. Some people definitely do hit harder than other people.
Yeah. I think, because you just know from like just being in gyms enough that they're just genetic freaks. They walk in on a day one, they can bench 100 kilos.
You cannot deny someone's genetic ability.
Yeah.
You can't.
I think people that have never really tested the limits of their physicality with other people as well, to appreciate when like you go into the gym, and most people's experience with bench pressing, like I always tell this story, right? We had this guy, his name was Henry, right? So back when we had CrossFit gyms, right? Smiley knows this guy, right? Honestly came out of nowhere. Like I swear he just walked out from the darkness one day from the gym, was like, I'm here. And he disappeared after 2 weeks, right? So he comes in, he pays for like 2 weeks, and he was I think he was Tongan.
Yeah, he's
Islander guy.
Yeah.
Probably about your size. Maybe like not crazy big, but like jacked, right?
Yeah.
And he walks in, he's like, yeah, we're going to do some bench press today. And this is like, we had a lot of good CrossFit athletes in the gym at the time doing like proper strength programs and stuff. Some big guys, probably benching 130, 140, 150, but like for a 1 rep max. And he comes in and he warms up, and it was like 3 sets of 8, and he did it at like 160, 165. And we're like, how often do you train at the gym? He's like, oh, this is like the second gym I've ever been to in my life. And he just played like high level footy. And you just think,
it's annoying.
People are just built different.
Well,
you know what I mean?
One of the best parts about him was we did goal setting at the gym.
Yeah.
I was like on his big board, and he's like, "Oh, what's some good goals to set, bro?" I'm like, "Oh, lots of people want to do muscle ups." Like, yeah, that's a good goal. So he like writes down muscle up, and then half an hour later he did it, and he walked back over, like, and we took a photo, crossing it off. And it was like, he's only there for 2 weeks.
Yeah. He left his I achieved my goals, I'm out.
Yeah.
Got a muscle up. But yeah, you realize in that particular context, and like I'm sure everyone's got an example, like maybe guys that, did athletics, right? Trained a whole life, every sprint technique, elite strength and conditioning, and then some dude who's never like got sprinting coaching before just out sprints you with no shoes. What I mean?
we have a young amateur boxer who, for the first time now, has started really being quite diligent with his program, and he is very naturally talented in terms of his athletic abilities. He's also quite a good boxer, so he's the sort of kid who you look at and you want to just guide him in the right direction and steer him, because he has all the natural abilities and skill abilities to do well.
Yeah.
And so that'd be the sort of person who, he does an RSI and it's like 3.3, which is quite elite. That's his like reactive strength index. Does his counter movement jump, and like scores are great. His strength numbers are great. His first time doing a strength program for 8 weeks consistent. He's trap bar deadlifting like 160 for 6 reps. Yeah. And he weighs 62 kilos. Yeah. It's impressive.
Yeah,
it's impressive.
Break,
He's back squatting 90 kilos for 8 reps at 62 kilos.
Yeah.
And it's his 8th week into a program. and we're just all thinking, okay, we just let's go slow.
Don't screw it up.
Let's go slow, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
definitely, I agree with you, man. Genetic ability, you can't really disregard it.
Yeah, and it's just like it's a hard pill to swallow, right? Because most people,
As in the person
average,
who isn't genetically
most of us,
Everyone.
right? And so we're just like, shit, I wish I was like that elite. But I also think that there's a component of, people will discount themselves too early. I think you really only know what your genetic potential is after a lot of training.
A lot of training.
Yeah. So I still think people take a while to be able to express that genetic potential, right?
Definitely.
And because they never push themselves or tap into it, or they see their starting point, they compare it to someone's end point, they go, I'm not a genetic freak. But I'm like, you haven't actually had the nervous system time or the coordination or the skill or the coaches to actually find out if you are or not.
Guys, what Lachlan said is fantastic for combat athletes.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean by fighters not doing adequate sound strength and conditioning training for a long period of time to see what the benefits can be. They'll do like a 12-week block, have a fight, feel like it wasn't really the best thing for them, and then associate their result or their performance to what they were doing in their S&C. And it's for me, it's like a lackluster mindset to have. You're finding the easiest thing to blame things on, and you're definitely copping out too early. It's a lot of people aren't willing to work as hard for the things that they want to achieve. I think both in like training and in a lot of other areas in life, a lot of people want to be stronger. They want to be faster. They want to be more powerful. They want to be leaner. They want to have more energy availability. They want to be more recovered, but they don't want to fucking do anything for it.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be that way. You need to work and do basics for a long period of time to see if you're actually good at this and if it's going to be benefiting you. So when it comes to strength and conditioning training, it's probably one of the types of training you should be doing year round, because it should be that box you're always ticking.
Yeah.
For general strength development, for general like energy system development, for injury resilience, for the fact that it allows you to exert and release a lot of stress. So definitely, I agree with what you said. A lot of people don't give it enough time.
Yeah.
They opt out and exit before they even had a chance to experience the benefits.
Yeah. Like the example with my brother is, I don't know how detailed his career and his story, but there was basically, for when he started, he was like that guy that in the gym, he just picked everything up and he just beat everyone up, right? And so he was really good. All the fights he had, he won pretty easily. And then he went for this title shot in Sydney. I can't remember where it was at, and he lost.
Super fight.
Was that? Yeah, maybe that was it.
Against Issy.
Was that? Yeah, the really short guy, short nuggety guy.
The short Tongan guy.
Yeah. And it was a pretty good fight up until that point. He had him in triangle, almost choked him out a few times, just beating him up on the ground, and then just stood up and just, when they broke, just wasn't protecting himself and then got clipped.
Yeah.
And at that point, you sort of thinking to yourself as an outsider looking in, it's like, maybe this is kind of like it. Like he's been improving between fights, but it's like you're looking at the guys in the UFC and you're thinking, still a massive gap to close here. Now you take that moment where it's like the lowest point of his career, which obviously, as you know, in hindsight, always is the best moment. And he moves to City Kickboxing. He goes through this period of like, is it for me? Is it not for me? Because he's still young at this point. I don't know, maybe 24 at the time, 23. Yep. Has this experience at City Kickboxing because just by chance, his girlfriend at the time was from Auckland. So they went and visited her family. And he's like, there's like this gym there. This guy like Israel, I think he's had like one fight in the UFC. I'm going to go check it out. And he goes there and he's like, I'm moving to Auckland. And like 2 months later, he's living in Auckland full time. But the amount of improvement that he made, if you looked at his improvement previous to that, you would think, it's impossible to achieve the level of skill that he's acquired now and how good he is now. Because you just assume all the guys over there, they just were always really good and they started that way. But what you miss is like with the right training program, with better coaches,
Correct.
with a better system, and someone who's genetically quite good, if you put it in the right system, they accelerate a lot faster.
Yep. And
so that's what you saw. You saw the gap, the difference between fights now was way more dramatic. Because every time I'd see him fight, I'm like, it's getting a lot better, a lot faster.
Your brother ran into an obstacle. He had a moment of impact and had to make a decision. The decision he made was the right decision. He took the hardest route to go and live in a gym when he's leaving a lot of comfort. He's leaving a lot of his friends and the warmth of living in Sydney and knowing your routine. Yeah. And he took the hardest fucking route. His story honestly reminds me a lot of another athlete that I coach. His name's Charles Joyner. Charlie is a kickboxer. You know, good family, nice home, lives in the hills. Started doing well on the Australian scene. Became Australian champion, Commonwealth champion, and then realized, okay, well, I'm not where I want to be, and I'm not going to get there by being in Australia. So Charles packs up last year, goes over to the UK, lives in a dorm in a gym, just like your brother, and starts training with like killers. Now he's sparring partners with Ben Aspinall, Darren Till. You know, he was supposed to fight for a ISCA world title a couple of weeks ago, but his opponent pulled out. He's fighting for a world title this weekend in Muay Thai. So again, you're looking at someone who is faced with an obstacle, needs to make a decision, and they take the hardest route to upskill themselves.
Right.
And if you look at your brother now, man, I guarantee you, if you look at him and his skill level compared to that fight that he lost, it's a different person.
Yeah,
it's a completely different person.
Completely.
It's funny. I actually messaged him because I was watching that fight the other night over dinner. I just felt like replaying it.
Which one?
Cam's fight against Izzy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I messaged your brother after, and I said, this was the fight that made you realize you need to make a lot of changes, wasn't it? He said, massive changes.
Yeah.
And he went and made the changes. He took the hardest route.
Yeah.
You know, stoic Marcus Aurelius, like the obstacle is the way, right?
Yeah.
So he saw the obstacle and he went, I'm going to chase the hardest route possible.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to do really well. I'm excited to see what your brother achieves.
Yeah. It's just getting that UFC contract's always a tricky beast, but
it is. But I think you don't want to rush it either.
No.
Cam's still young. You know, he's still young. I think
especially for that division as well.
A few more domestic fights for him. You know, practice what you're working on, and then when he gets the shot, he'll be ready for it.
Well, winning King of the Ring, you know, obviously, which is like one of the crowning combat sports events.
King of the Ring's awesome. Yeah,
it's like if you can do that, I mean, it fills you with so much confidence. You feel like you can do one fight in a night. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
And he's also did something in a skill set that's not his strength.
Correct.
Like, he loves jiu-jitsu.
Your brother's
a
grappler.
Yeah.
You know.
So
he's a sleek grappler too.
Giving you a lot of confidence. But just to speak to that stoic thing. When I went to his house or his place, this was his nice place in Auckland after he got out of his shit place, and it wasn't very nice that way. But when I went in there, first of all, it smelled like a laundry room. Like it just smelled like
typical wet clothes.
Really bad, right? Yeah. And I had to sleep on the couch when I was over there, and it was right next to a train line. And he's in there, and like you go in his room, and there's just covered in like inspirational quotes, and you're like, this is like what you need to surround yourself with to like make it through as like a fighter, because these are the stories, right? Anthony Joshua, like everyone knows him, same thing. I think for most of his fight camps, I don't know if he still does, but for a long time, even when he was really famous, he still lived in the exact same place, even though multi-millionaire, still lived, or at least he did his fight camps in the same apartment that like he grew up in, just to put him in that mindset of like you're an underdog. And like
I like that though.
Yeah. So he'd shut all it out, nothing nice, just like back to his old shit apartment in the hood, and he would just go back to that
It's
mindset.
very hard to be like that when you're the champion.
Yeah,
it really is.
Wake up in silk sheets, as they say.
It really is. It's they call it like the curse of the belts, right? For a reason.
Yeah.
You know, when you become champion, there's this onus of media. There's this onus of being the go-to guy, and it drains the person, whether they can see it or not. It does, and some people naturally deal with it better. Others don't deal with it as good, but it's, you know, you're looking at people that are the 0.0001% of a population.
Yeah.
You have combat athletes who call it 1%. Then you've got that small percentage in that percentage that end up being world champions.
Yeah.
So it's a very unique sort of person. I think Israel recently, over the weekend, I liked what he said after the press conference to the media crew. He said, just be nicer with your words, because you guys can't do what I can do.
Yeah.
But I could do what you can do. And I posted this after George's fight, when he had the loss against Haney. A lot of people were saying this is it, end of George's career. He's 28 years old, mind you. It's his first loss.
Yeah.
Nobody could live a day in the life of this person, but they're very quick to say things about them.
Yeah.
It's the nature of human beings in today's world. We're very quick to criticize people and project shit onto them because of our own, when I say our own, of their own insecurities and the things they're not doing. So, yeah, being a champion is, you know, it's... They're that person for a reason.
Yeah.
They're that minority for a reason.
Well, arguably the greatest boxer of all time, or will be very soon, Canelo. He's basically one of his best runs happened after his first loss against Mayweather.
Correct.
Right? And he's only gotten better since. He's just lost recently. Obviously, it was a huge monumental task going up so much weight.
Yeah.
But he might then become even better after that now. He's still young, right? 31 or 32. So.
I think Canelo's got a good fight against him against Golovkin. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, that's going to be good. That's going to be really good.
I
But
love Golovkin.
yeah, I mean, Golovkin's a bit of an outlier freak as well. 40 years old, still fighting, like still a beast. So
Yeah.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens. One thing I'm curious to know though, is that the apartment, by the way?
Yeah.
That he lives? Yeah, that's like his.
Anthony Joshua praised by fans after. Is that his apartment?
Yeah, that's like the shithole.
Man, I love that. That's
You know
so
what?
cool.
He's so big that it makes the apartment look small.
Yeah, it's like a normal size cat.
It's a 4-bedroom.
I think it's a huge apartment. But he's nearly hitting the roof.
Yeah, well, he's a giant, obviously.
That's cool.
He's fighting Usyk again, I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure,
he is,
pretty
he is.
soon,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, he
Yeah,
is.
it's booked. But no, I was gonna say, like, one of the interesting things about, I guess, where George is at now, like you're saying, the curse of the belts, is like, it feels like Australians are really good at always utilizing the underdog mentality, for better or worse. Like, you hear Americans, I always say the post-fight American interview. We're talking about this on the way here, Connor. The post-fight American interview versus the post-fight, Australian interview. One's like, dude, I always believed it. Like, I'm the man. I was born great. Like, this is just me achieving greatness. And the Aussie's like, I still got work to do. Like, I got to get back in the gym tomorrow. Like, I got to work on my weaknesses. It wasn't a great performance, but, I've won 7 in a row and I'm the champ. It's like, you are the best. You just don't think you are. I think it kind of lets, obviously there's a lot of great American champions. I'm not taking away from that, but the two cultures create two very different mindsets. And I think Australian champs generally still are quite good at not getting too big for their boots and still like being an underdog.
Yeah, I think so. We haven't had that many champions to be able to say so, but
When we do.
so far so good. I mean, look, it took Volkanovski how many title defenses to be taken seriously?
Yeah, I know.
He's definitely the greatest featherweight of all time, and only now people are starting to say, okay, he is.
Yeah,
He'd had to beat the same person three times. to be crowned that.
Yeah.
So because we're young in the sport and we're not as recognized as America in the sport, which is fair because it wasn't established here, it takes time to develop credibility. But in the last 2 years, Australia has 3 boxing world champions. You got Jai Opetaia, who on the weekend became the cruiserweight IBF world champion.
Yeah.
Ebony Bridges, again, bantamweight IBF world champion.
Yeah.
George was undisputed a year ago. So, you got Tim Tszyu doing very well. Lucas Brown we had as a world champion not so long ago. So we're starting to get that credibility. It's why matchmakers are coming to Australia. Yeah. Obviously, we've had Whitaker, we've had Volkanovski, and we have a lot of Australian athletes very successful on the international stage. Yeah. So the guys from down under previously, that doesn't really apply anymore. Yeah. I think combat sports in our country has never been as prolific as it is right now, in my opinion. Yeah.
I'd say the only unfortunate thing that came off the back of George's loss, and even if he'd won, honestly, but I don't think it's anything anyone could have done about it. The problem with boxing's always been is if you don't knock people out, because it's such a technical sport compared to MMA. MMA is like just by nature just chaos and exciting, right? So it's generally less boring than the average boxing fight. People watch that fight. So he brought so many casual fans in, probably that most of them watched their first full-length boxing match ever. And because it wasn't that exciting in terms of like what they were after, right? Knock him out or someone getting dropped. I think that it did hurt combat sports or boxing scene a little bit in Australia. They're like, here's the biggest boxing event, at least in our generation. Yep. And it just was like pretty underwhelming.
That fight was a lot closer than what the casual fan thinks.
Of course.
It was stylistically a well-executed plan on Haney's part. I genuinely think the attitude of the referee could have changed the dynamic of that fight a lot.
How so?
Well, there was, I think, total 7.5 minutes of holding time in that fight. Right. And so you can 7.5 minutes. And so if you get a referee that says, look, Haney, if you hold him one more time, I'm going to take a point off you, it suddenly changes the fight quite a lot. Because what happens is George works to get onto the inside and did that several times in the fight. Every time that happens, Haney clinches him up. And then the referee breaks the fight up and doesn't give George an opportunity to work on working inside that clinch position and punching in the pocket, right? So then you reset those two fighters, and then as soon as you reset them, you're resetting them at Haney's range, where he is his best. And so it's at a complete disadvantage every single time you do that. He did that 7.5 minutes of holding time. I think there were 54 breaks in the whole fight. Yeah. But look, again, it's a loss. You know, people lose in sport every single day. Again, on the weekend, Israel said that in the pre-fight conference. He said, I lost to Jan, so what? George lost to Haney, and what? He lost to who is now the undisputed champion. It was his first loss. People make such a big deal like it's the end of his career. Again, it's retarded fight fans who are sitting on the back end of a computer and have never sparred one round in their lives.
Yeah.
So you got to take it with a grain of salt, definitely.
Yeah.
But look, the rematch is live, and it's going to happen this year, and it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting to see how George responds, how Haney responds, who makes the changes, and who comes away with the next fight.
Yeah. It's just unfortunate that those are the people that make sports exist, are the retarded casual fans, right?
Of course.
And you just wish, even if he had lost in more spectacular
Here's the thing,
fashion.
bro. Here's the thing. Come the rematch, they're going to pay and they're going to be there.
There we go.
They will.
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt it. Yeah, they're in. Have they booked it for the US? I imagine it's in the US.
It's going to be in Australia.
Oh, it's going to be in Australia.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Do we have a date
How do you get
yet?
2 fights in a row in Australia?
It was
That was probably in the
contracted.
contract, right?
Right.
Yeah, it was contracted.
Yeah. But if he had won,
Yeah.
moving on to the next fighter.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let me ask you this question, right? Lomachenko was supposed to fight George originally.
Correct.
Which was
scheduled.
Which obviously the war ruined that, unfortunately. Lomachenko, for those who don't know who are listening, basically probably one of the greatest boxers of all time. Like, incredible story, incredible style, footwork. Like, how he was amateur record was like
365 or something.
Yeah.
One loss which he redeemed.
Yeah, which is like
unbelievable.
Just insane, right? And when you talk about freak athletes, like, you go on his Instagram, there's him like doing insane soccer stuff and backflips and like all this crazy shit. You just think this guy's just like
boxing IQ is on another level.
Next level.
Definitely.
Next level. That obviously is an insane fight to set up for George. What was it? Obviously, I assume that you were somewhat involved in the decision-making process, maybe with the fight, or not at all?
Definitely not.
Okay. So when they're picking that opponent versus this opponent, does much change for you? Is a lot change, or it's all just as business as usual?
Business as usual. Yeah. I know which boots I put on. Yeah. It's I have discussions and I'm close with George, so we have good conversations around tactics. I'm interested in those things. I don't directly influence those things. Okay. It's not my job.
Yeah,
definitely. He's got coaches. He's got his managers. He knows himself well. We discuss, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this sort of component, bringing it into the fight, etc. But yeah, definitely not my area.
Yeah. How tricky does stuff like that get behind the scenes? Obviously, you've known him for a long time before. Probably a lot of different faces showed up, like you.
George has a very small circle, always had a very small circle.
And that's what you've seen from your fighters and athletes, always the best way to keep it.
Definitely. The higher level guys, small circle, man. Very, very selective with who gets involved, which it should be that way.
Yeah.
Definitely. Obviously Tyson's circle now is changing because he's changed gyms. He's training at CKB now. And
Did he move? Has he moved?
Yeah, he has.
Okay.
Yeah, he moved about 4 weeks ago.
Okay.
So he's going to be staying there full time, and I think it's the best move for him. There's not enough big guys that are suitable for him, and he won't learn enough here. And in Sydney also the scene's quite scattered. So for him to get the training that he needs, there's a lot of travel involved.
Yes.
Whereas him right now, he lives in Auckland, away from any sort of like distractions, media obligations, because he's a Sydney sider. Just goes to training, eats, spends time with his family when they're there, and that's it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I think it's fantastic for him.
That is the unique thing about Auckland. Shit weather, not a whole lot to do, small population, like just be indoors and focus and train, right? Not a lot of distractions. Like that makes a huge difference, right? You think about Sydney. Yeah. God, there's something to do every night, right? There's places to go, food to eat. People want to do this.
I don't go out that much.
Yeah, okay. Right. There is. And that is difficult for a fighter because they always feel like they're missing out. But when you're collectively sharing in like the same experiences with so many people,
that's where it's different, man. You've got at that gym so many high level athletes that are all trying to achieve the same thing. So the energy and the culture is very unique, right? Your brother is trying to do what Tyson is doing. Tyson is trying to climb the ladder and be the champion, like Israel is. So there's a very everyone's just collectively working hard towards similar goals.
Yeah.
It's partly why the culture at our facility is really cool as well, because anytime when you come in, you've got so many different athletes at different levels, but also committed towards achieving, essentially being better versions of themselves in their sport. So it lifts people.
Yeah.
The environment is definitely important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also who sets that culture is the coaches, right? Like some of the best stories that come out of CKB are just like about the coaches doing certain things, right?
Yeah.
Because they set the standard, they set the culture for the athletes to follow.
The coaches cultivate the environment, right? They're the start of the place.
Yeah.
You know, the athletes wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the coaches that started that place.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely I agree with you.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears as we take this conversation more business route. We've got a lot of gym owners, PTs that talk to us and listen to the show as well. So one of the things I'm curious about, where are you at in terms of what the future is for Ethos now? What you do obviously is very like specific to many people in terms of if you were to get elite combat sports athletes in Sydney, you talk about that pool of people, it's relatively small. Obviously it's growing, but it's small. You've launched this online thing. Did you imagine you want to do that? Do you want to open more gyms? Do you want to,
Locke, it's an interesting one because I'm so happy in like my life and my role at the moment. I'm genuinely like wake up every day and I love what I do.
It's awesome.
Like that vision board you have, I have my vision board, and 7 years ago my vision board was just Ethos. It was Ethos Globe, and it had like things like UFC there as well, because I wanted to be at that level where I could work with those athletes and have those relationships. So I've effectively achieved those things now, and so as you always do, you revisit your vision board and you revisit your goals and your 1, 3, 5 year like dreams, etc. And one thing that I'm always trying to get better at is just enjoying the present moment, because it took a lot of hard work to be able to be in this position, right? But for me, my passion has always been to help more fighters. And it really is that simple. That's all I want to do. Whether it's in Australia, whether it's in New Zealand, in the UK, in other countries, I'd like to do my best to enable fighters with the resources that I have and what I can help them with. And for Ethos at the moment, I'd say the initial goal was become the premier strength and conditioning facility for combat athletes in the country. And I can confidently say that we've done that so far, by way of the amount of fighters we work with every day. And
I would agree, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. And look, there are some great practitioners Australia based that are also doing really cool things. So it's not about me like, holding my, in my hand going, it's not about that. But I pat myself on the shoulder where it's due. Like, it took a lot of hard work to establish that. What I want to do now is, if we're looking at business and scaling things, I've set the challenge of preparing 10,000 fights. I set this random arbitrary number of, the vision of the business is to have a global impact on combat sports. I feel like we've already done that. Some submissions of the mission, no pun intended, is to have like an educational footprint, which is why we pushed to have that combined research project with the UFC PI. And another one was to prepare 10,000 bouts. We can't do that just working with domestic fighters. It'd take a long time.
Yeah, many decades.
And by way of fighters not always having a lot of money, sometimes they can't afford the resources that we can provide, whether it be by working with us, affording dietitians. And so it's still early days, but we are trying to build a sort of community and a resource that fighters can pay something like $10 a week. That's what they're paying at the moment, to have access to all of those things.
Like an app subscription?
It's not an app just yet, but I want to build out an Ethos app in the next 12 months.
So you follow the path on an app. So instead of doing like the fitness app, you do the...
Look, the way I can envision it is you download the Ethos app, you go in, sign up. I'm an MMA athlete. I'm an amateur. This is my training experience. I'm not fighting anytime soon, or I'm fighting in 6 weeks. You press that button, and then this is the program we suggest for you. Add to cart, purchase in app, and then your program's there. And then in the app, you can join the private group that enables you to have access to dietitians, psychologists, the coaching team, etc. That's what I want to build out. We've effectively started doing that at a more cost-effective way for us in terms of operations, and we're just the process of trial and error at the moment, seeing what people say. Do they like the program? Is it easy to follow? So we have some cancellations already, which is fine, because we're asking them, what didn't you like? How can we make this better? This is the program resource your brother's using. He's someone that's really easy to work with. He says, hey, look, man, I'm fighting on this day. What should I do? I'm like, cool. Your program has been updated. when I did like a market analysis, you know how you do like your market analysis,
Sure.
and you look at like your strategic opponents and all those sorts of things. I looked at a lot of the combat athlete programs that people can purchase online. They're just programs. You get like a PDF package, and it's got videos included sometimes, and that's it. I wanted to create more of like an ongoing resource. I didn't want you to pay for a program. I wanted you to pay for a team of coaches. That's what I
like
want.
an online community.
Correct.
Yeah.
I want you to have access to coaches, not just a program, because you can download a program that'll do the job quite easily for free online.
Yeah.
I wanted you to have the ability for $10 a week to communicate with me, because although like you go, oh, but you work with like world champions, I'm not better than helping the next amateur person. I just want to scale the way we can help them and make it cost effective for them. So the mission of the online program is to provide, you know, the high quality strength and conditioning services to combat athletes at cost effective prices anywhere in the world.
Right.
That's like the mission. It doesn't mean we're going to fall short on delivering at our facility. We're looking at ways to upgrade what we do at our facility, how to fine tune our processes, all those sorts of things. But I want our facility at Silverwater in Sydney to be like a hub. If you have the luxury to come in and train with us, you can do so. But if you're anywhere in the world, you can still work with our team and get a really good fucking result, and pay $10 a week for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that's my big mission at the moment. It's cool. Like I ticked the first goal of the amount of people I wanted signed up in the early stages as like testers. So we ticked that goal. Now it's about, okay, I want to have X amount of people on the program, not because it's like I want this much finance from it. It's because that will then allow me to invest in an app and make it a really like cool app.
Yeah.
Then the app can have things like meal plan templates that Geordie provides, basic hydration protocols. So a fighter can log into that app and have so many things available to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. That's cool.
That's the goal.
That's cool. Give me one athlete that you like dream athlete. I mean, you've worked with some pretty high level guys, but if there's one combat sports athlete you'd love to work with, who would it be and why? Anyone. Can be like international, doesn't have to be Australian. Is there anyone you looked at and you're like, fuck, I would love to work with you for a fight camp?
Do they have to be currently fighting, or can they have been retired?
Give me both.
Okay. One of my favorite fighters is George Pierre. I would love to go back in time and work with him when he was the champion, because I liked everything he stood for as a person, as a martial artist. Currently a fighter.
Sorry, can I make a comment on GSP?
Yeah.
He was like the I think he was like the poster boy. He was like the original Conor McGregor, right? He was the guy. He looked so good. Everyone wanted to look like him.
Yeah.
He was so humble.
Yeah.
Right. He did like gymnastics. He did all this like crazy stuff. I mean, you even know GSP, Raf. Like that's saying something, right? And he and he dominated for so many years.
GSP is a brand.
Yeah.
He achieved brand status, not just athlete status.
And now he's got hair and he's like doing all kinds of Instagram ads and stuff. But he's still people love him.
Definitely. Otherwise, current combat athlete that I would like to work with. That's an interesting one. I really like Anthony Joshua.
Okay.
And I can see that he surrounds himself with good coaches in all areas. So I think he respects professional coaches in different roles. So it'd be awesome to work with someone like Anthony Joshua. I think he's a great champion, and his responses to his obstacles are very like admirable. In mixed martial arts, again, someone who stands for like, you know, a good person is someone like Khabib. I like how Khabib displays himself. It'd be great to go back and work with someone like Khabib.
Yeah.
Current young fighter who I really like his style, and I think will be a super cool prospect. I think he's just entered top 15 now. On the weekend he fought Brad Riddell, Jalen Turner.
Yeah.
He looks like he's going to be a noisemaker in the division. So, you know, those sorts of athletes that you can tell the code of conduct is strong. They appreciate working hard. They work hard. They do so year round. Surround themselves with the right people.
So you meant the guy who fought Brad Riddell?
The guy who fought Brad Riddell.
Yeah.
Jalen Turner. I like him.
Yeah. What's his nickname? It's like the Tarantula.
Tarantula.
Yeah.
He's so long.
Yeah.
He's huge for that
Dude,
division.
it's crazy.
Man.
Yeah. It's like
huge.
so tall. It's like 6'3". Brad's like 5'7" or something.
Brad's an absolute warrior, man.
Yeah.
And Brad's such a good fighter, and man, they've given Brad hard fights.
Yeah.
Like for Steve, his last fight.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's a
That was
hard
close.
fight.
Like it was
Very
close for a
close,
while.
man.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful fight.
Yeah, it was a good
Beautiful.
fight.
Any person who appreciates striking at a high level, that was a great fight to watch.
The level of striking in the UFC is getting absurd.
It's so
Like,
good.
Yeah.
So good.
Cool, man. Well, I think we covered all bases, but yeah, I appreciate you coming in.
Appreciate you
I
having
definitely
me.
think people go check out Ethos Performance. Like your Instagram's probably the best place to do it, right?
Yeah, I have my own personal page. It's just my name, Meer, surname Awny. Then we have the Ethos Performance page.
Yep.
Just signed up on TikTok. I didn't. Our media,
nice.
one of our media guys did it. I
Alright.
don't want to be involved in
Yeah,
TikTok.
don't worry about it.
I like how you
Um,
we signed up and then just spent 20 seconds.
Same
Move
way, don't
yourself
worry.
away. It wasn't me. Don't even know the person that did it. It
I'm
was
not.
against my
I haven't
rules.
even downloaded the app. I
Yeah.
want nothing to
I think
do
it's
with
called
it.
TokTik.
It's owned by the Chinese Communist Party, so avoid it.
I have a question for you, Locke.
Sure.
Why did you want to bring on someone involved in combat sports? Obviously, you got an interest in combat sports, but
Yeah.
is it? I won't say what I think. Why?
Makes the
Like-
brand look tougher.
Aha.
People don't
Okay.
fuck with us. Send us rude messages.
Nice. Is that why we wore a singlet today?
It's not
When it's
offensive.
fucking
Yeah,
2
yeah.
degrees outside.
It's warm in here though. It does look funny. I'm like in a jacket,
I know.
Yeah,
sweating
I'm in
my
a
ass
beanie.
off.
It's part of the show. It's part of the show.
Yeah, I think like part of the reason that we started the podcast, I touched on this briefly, but the reason we started the podcast in the beginning was because like we just wanted to sit down and have conversations with people that we always really wanted to speak to and have conversations with. And I feel like in the fitness industry, like we basically ticked the vast majority of those boxes. There's very few people we could say like we haven't had an opportunity to sit down and speak with, Zoom or in person. I would love to have had a lot of the people we had on Zoom in person. But obviously you can't always make that a reality. But just with my personal interest in combat sports and in strength conditioning, like those worlds coming together, there's just honestly not many people that I could get on that I would be that interested to speak to. And then like, quite frankly, it's just a respect thing. Just like they've done things or they kind of work with some fighters who aren't that good. And that's just been the natural progression of our combat sports scene in Australia. It's just pretty green, right? It's pretty small.
Yep.
But now there's guys like you that, you know, are more established, are like what we saw in the States 3 or 4 years ago, where I'm like, okay, he's working with the top guys in our sport and he's actually doing evidence-based training. I think we'll actually have a good conversation. And the additional layer to that is like, you aren't just like some coach in a gym, you run a business as well. So
Correct.
we obviously understand that grind as well. So managing all that while training top talent, having all the time for them, because I'm sure when George is in camp, so much of your time, focus, communication, energy gets pulled out of the business and into one athlete. There's not one client that pulls all our attention for 8 weeks and focus, because there's so much riding on that, right?
Yeah,
And it's
definitely.
also benefits the business, of course, if he does well, understand that. But just balancing those things, I think is hard.
I definitely agree with that. Like the whole managing the business, growing the business, and being a leader for the team and providing direction in that aspect, and then having to deal with an athlete like George or Tyson or Arlene preparing for Cyborg. The thing that's cool, man, is, and I'll probably leave it on this, is it's what I said earlier, where I always like humble myself because I get to wake up and work with these guys who are the 1% within the 1%. So I don't take it lightly, and man, I absolutely love it. And I just want to share what I do with them with other fighters around the world.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome.
And everyone can learn from this podcast, right? Any sport, anywhere, any coach, any business owner. So
What are you
Appreciate
going to call the app? You gotta have some sick name like Mealy or something.
Ethos Performance app, bro. What are you talking about?
No, that can't be the name of the app, bro. Ethos Performance. You want a worldwide app. People haven't heard
What's
of
wrong with
Ethos.
Ethos Performance?
You need something like Uber, like boom.
Mealy. Mealy.
All right, we're going to call it there. For
Mealy great.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a comment down below.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, guys. Mealy.
Mealy.